Now, I believe we have a number of people tuning in now as we're starting. So I think we can get started. And I'll just share a slideshow screen here. Okay, we'll get started. So good morning, everybody. My name is John McGeady, CEO of Social Justice Ireland, and welcome to the launch of Budget Choices 2027. You can download our briefing from the publication section of our website at socialjustice.ie and follow along. We'll give a whistle-stop tour of our Budget Choices document today, and I am joined by my colleagues, Michelle Murphy, Suzanne Rogers, and Mansi Rawat. There is an option for you to put questions into the Q&A, and we'll have some time for Q&A after the presentation's ended. So to begin with, I suppose the first thing is we need to have a look at the context for Budget Choices 2027. The first thing we must recognise is that we're living in deeply uncertain times. Threats from geopolitical instability in the Middle East and Ukraine, and the continued potential for trade disruption with the United States. And this all creates a very unpredictable global environment that can affect the economic picture, the political picture, and the social picture for Budget 2027. And of course, as a consequence of these conflicts, as we know, we have seen surges in energy prices, and energy prices remain highly unpredictable if the war in the Middle East continues. There is a possibility of further escalations in those prices in the months to come. So it's important to acknowledge that inflation, and particularly energy costs and food costs, hit those lowest income households hardest. Now, as well as responding to sort of these international developments, Ireland continues to work towards a number of international commitments and targets which we signed up to. For example, we should be trying to reach a target of 50% reduction in net greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And this will all have to be resourced as well. In terms of our economic context, we have one where the Irish economy is increasingly divided into two sectors: a booming international sector that is unsteady, and a more fragile domestic economy. And of course, both these aspects of the economy face the challenges of the changing international economic context as well. And then in terms of our social context, it's one where we have persistent deficits in public services and social infrastructure, and these combine with ongoing challenges around inequality, participation, living standards that leave more and more people struggling. So we'll just have a look here at the fiscal context for Budget 2027 as well. And the first thing to note, I suppose, is that government really is running very large surpluses. However, according to the Department of Finance, much of this budgetary surplus is related to windfall revenue from a small number of multinational companies. And so when we talk about windfall, what we're really talking about here is revenue that's over and above what would be expected to generate from the profits related to the activity actually happening here in Ireland. And in the medium term, these revenues will shift from Ireland to other states where those profits are actually being made. And of course, this then leaves a risk of putting a hold on our public finances. So at present, however, the Department of Finance does expect these revenues to continue, but over time they will slowly disappear. And of course, the risk again is that depending on what happens, if there's a significant shock to the system, they could leave much more quickly. The Department of Finance estimates that the windfall revenues will reach 20 billion in 2026. And this means that really we are very exposed. And what we actually have is an underlying deficit of 10.8 billion in 2026, and then rising to 12.3 billion in 2027. And this is something that our budget proposals attempt to tackle as well. So In terms of what we're proposing then, given this context, we believe that next year's budget needs to do four things. It must promote fairness and a more equitable distribution of our economic resources. It must protect the most vulnerable and enhance resilience in the face of poverty and cost of living pressures. It must address the deficits in our social infrastructure and services, and we have a range of policy recommendations that we look at for that. And it must also prepare for the future and address the risks that I've discussed and that are posed by the sort of the unsustainable fiscal policy that we're currently have in place. To do all of this, we believe government needs to be more realistic about how much will need to be spent to address existing deficits and future demands and needs. So therefore, we're proposing a sort of an overarching fiscal framework whereby government sets a per capita tax take. This would link Ireland's overall level of taxation to population size and then the related demand on resources that grows as the population size also grows. So we have a range of tax measures to raise revenue and to make the system fairer. And to look at that, I'll hand over to Mansi. Mansi.
Thanks, John. And I think John has covered a lot. And building on the wider social, economic, and fiscal context we've just heard, I'll just briefly touch upon our approach to tax reform, and that is guided by the principles of fairness, sustainability, and long-term structural reform. Our key priority is increasing our overall tax take. As we all know, the current level of tax revenue, excluding the windfall, isn't enough to sustainably fund the public services and infrastructure we already have, let alone the additional investment that's needed as our population continues to grow. So in the recent years, as John has mentioned, we have benefited from exceptionally high corporation tax receipts, but these are, again, volatile, can't be relied on indefinitely, especially for recurring expenditure. And that's why we believe the question is not like whether Ireland needs to raise, but how we do it. And as mentioned earlier, like the main proposal is to move towards a per capita tax take target. And this is important because it provides a clearer, more transparent benchmark for planning future investment. And in 2026 terms, this would equate to almost 29,000 euros per capita. And if we look at the current revenue that is generated, excluding the windfall, there is a shortfall of almost 35 billion euros, and that is a huge gap. But filling this gap can be done, and broadening the tax base is the answer to that. And this would make the public finances more resilient. And we have like a number of proposals, some of which we will talk about in the next slide. And finally, again, fairness has to be at the center of any of these tax reform. That means ensuring profitable businesses and households make an appropriate contribution. And we need to review tax reliefs where necessary and create a tax system that's simpler, fairer, and capable of funding the services people rely on. So the next slide looks at what this would mean in practice for Budget 2027. So first, like we believe the government should avoid regressive tax measures, including broad-based tax cuts that reduce the revenue available for public investment. This includes like measures that were introduced last year, like VAT reductions applied to catering and hairdressing. The government should reverse that. At a time when Ireland's facing major public spending pressures, I think sustainable public finances should take priority. And second, we recommend strengthening the social insurance fund through a phased increase in PRSI. So right now, the PRSI rates remain low by European standards and gradually increasing contributions now by just 0.5 percentage points a year will raise almost 1 billion per year. And this will help ensure that we can sustainably fund pensions and other social insurance supports into the future. We also recommend strengthening measures on empty homes and underutilized lands by increasing the vacant homes tax rate and strengthening the residential zone land tax by increasing it to 5%. At present, it's 3%. And these measures would encourage existing homes and service lands to be brought back into use, which is quite important right now, and raise an additional 38 million euros. We also recommend reviewing tax expenditures. These include the ability of corporations to carry losses forward. So currently it's indefinite, and we propose that a rolling limit of 5 years be introduced. We also would propose that we need to reform research and development tax credit. And just by removing the refundable element of this tax credit, like this alone would raise around €500 million in a full year. So we have like a we have proposed a range of measures in our policy briefing, and I've touched upon a few. And if implemented in Budget 2027, these would raise 4.1 billion in the first year and would continue to increase in the years ahead. And taken together, these proposals would support us in moving towards broadening the tax base, improving fairness, and provide sustainable revenue needed to fund long-term priorities and key infrastructure such as housing. Now, we all know Ireland's housing and homelessness crisis continues to deepen. Uh, Despite recent commitments, we are still not building enough homes to meet the existing or future population needs. And at the same time, we are continuing to rely too heavily on private markets to deliver what is ultimately a basic social need. That's why we believe Budget 2027 should begin strengthening Ireland's social housing system. Now, we are calling for an additional 2.16 billion investment to increase social housing delivery with the aim of building 20,000 social homes each year. And of this, that we recommend that government designate an amount of social housing units to be built according to universal design principles. And expanding this would not only provide secure homes for those on the waiting list, but also designating universally designed homes would improve access to suitable homes for people with disabilities, while also enabling older renters to right size into accessible homes that better meet their needs and free up larger homes for families. It would also reduce pressure on the wider housing market and create a lasting public asset for future generations. Now, finally, for homelessness, we need to shift towards prevention-focused policies. Too much spending continues to go on private hotels and other temporary accommodation rather than on prevention and permanent housing solutions. That's why we are calling for an expansion of housing first approach to families experiencing homelessness, backed by an investment of 130 million, so that families can move directly into secure permanent homes with the supports they need. And together, these measures would shift housing policy away from managing crisis and towards providing affordable, secure homes as part of a stronger and more sustainable housing system. Thank you. And with this, I'd like to hand over to Suzanne, who's going to talk about income and welfare.
Now, just remember to unmute there. Again, thanks to Mansi. I mean, I think Mansi's really covered off some of the really key issues for Irish society at the moment, which is how do we raise the money we need in order to be able to provide the services we want, and also housing. That's really the big thing. I'm going to just concentrate, I suppose, briefly on work and welfare, the link between the two. So work, obviously, it needs to pay. We constantly hear about making work pay. Any of us who were at the pre-budget forum yesterday from the Department of Social Protection, that was a key part of that, the National Economic Dialogue, these big conversations about making work pay. We are a country at the moment, as John said at the outset, where there's two parallel tracks where a lot of very, very high paid people and then a lot of very, very low paid people, and that middle bit is being hollowed out. So in terms, I suppose, of making work pay, and it's particularly for those on lower incomes nearer the minimum wage, we would be looking for a system of refundable tax credits. More information about that is in the document. You can go through that there. That's going to cost 210 million, which again I do think is cheap at the price. And then to increase the two main tax credits by €5 a week at a cost of 712 million. Again, it is going to alleviate a lot of the hardships that are being experienced at the moment across the country due to rising costs. And again, as we all know, and all of the research shows, those on the lowest incomes are hit hardest by increases in inflation and hit hardest by increases in cost in the basics, because there's no wiggle room and you cannot negotiate your way through. These are not luxuries, these are things that you have to have on. So again, when we look at the link between in-work poverty as well and wage rates, Just as an addition to that, obviously we are part of the Living Wage Technical Working Group and will be advocating for a living wage as well. So if I move on then through to social welfare, benchmarking really again is the key thing. And again, at yesterday's pre-budget forum with the Department of Social Protection, there seems to be widespread consensus across every organisation that a system of benchmarking is really, really key. Our suggestion or our advocacy piece is around benchmarking it to 27.5% of average weekly earnings. This is a continuation and an update of a 2007 commitment already made by government. For government to be able to breach that gap, it will cost 25 a week. So what we're asking is that be spread over 2 years, increase it by 15 a week this year at a cost of 516, and making up the difference then in next year's budget. Really, really important to equalise job seekers rates for those under 25 at the moment. They are at a reduced rate, and I appreciate the reasons why it was introduced originally was to try and keep young people in education longer. But what we're seeing, reports from Retail Excellence Ireland, where they're saying that national minimum wage is too high and that they can't afford to pay young workers. We're also seeing Department of Finance saying that AI is impacting on young workers. So this is a key issue, I think, for the under 25s and their entry into the workplace for a variety of reasons, and for them to be able to have a full job seekers rate to allow them, I suppose, as well, to be job ready, to be able to prepare for interviews, to be able to, upskill and reskill as things change. It will be really important that they get the full job seekers rate. And again, they get the reduced rate if they are living usually at home. Now, again, for a lot of people under 25, that is simply because they have nowhere else to be. So that's going to cost 69 million if we're going to equalise the difference in the rates there. We are asking for fuel allowance to be extended by another 4 weeks. That's going to cost 71 million. And again, in pensions, also by 15 a week, and that's going to cost 570 million. I'm going to move on then to our asks again across community. This is just getting more and more and more important. As we've said before, local is everything. Local is where we live. This is key to social cohesion. This is key to our economic growth. So investing in the community and voluntary sector, and again, that came up a lot yesterday, where when we look at the impact of poverty, not only on individuals, but also on communities across the country, and what you can see is the pressures and the demands that are being placed on the community and voluntary sector to plug the gaps in other services. They haven't been I suppose, sorry, the rates of support that community voluntary sector got hasn't been reinstated since the financial crash, the last one. We're waiting for the next one. And again, in order to really protect the most vulnerable in Irish society, we are asking that it's a continued, ongoing, sustainable investment in our communities and in people who are working in our communities to make them better. The PPNs, our friends across the PPNs across the country, again, do amazing work right the way across environmental, social inclusion, community and voluntary. We've had the good fortune to be at a couple of events this year and just see the really amazing work that they do and the spaces that they operate in. We would ask again for those to be protected and invest in those. So resource them to resource their communities, support them to support their communities. Libraries, again, something very, very close to Sister Bridget's heart. So we always make sure that we mention them. She was a huge advocate for the libraries. And again, anybody who uses them, appreciates as a community hub how vital they are. They do incredible work. Librarians do incredible work there as community hubs, the sort of events that go on in libraries. Again, myriad of exhibitions and talks, crafting workshops, all of these things. The access to education, the access to information, again, is really, really, really vital at this particular moment in time. And it's so important that they are protected and that they are maintained as well. I just think that that's really, really key. Funding financial literacy, again, really, really important. We have a new financial literacy strategy in from the Department of Finance, and that is looking at what is happening. Again, it is an interesting strategy because it's really weaving together work that's already being done by, again, a really wide variety of community and voluntary, professional, for-profit, non-for-profit, right the way across the system, making sure that we fully understand what we're engaging with when we buy financial products, when we engage with the financial system. And I think as the financial system gets more and more complicated, buy now, pay later products didn't exist a couple of years ago. As more and more of our money moves on to, cards, how can we protect ourselves from scams and frauds and abuse? Again, it's very important. So that's a really key thing as well for protecting people within our communities. And the national strategy on loneliness as well. Again, we would ask that would be, continue to be funded, and that the economic impact of something like loneliness, as well as the social and cultural impact, it does have an impact right the way across the board. And we would ask that the strategy and the implementation of pilots would be funded at the cost of 1.4 million. I'm going to move on then to our asks in the international protection space. Again, this is really it's human rights. I think we really need to remind ourselves of that when we talk about protecting and sheltering people coming from other countries into Ireland. And again, the fact that Ireland is a safe place for people to live and grow, I think again is a huge success story. And whilst the day report and the white paper seems to have vanished, again, we are still experiencing inward flows of people who are coming to Ireland in order to be able to build safe lives. The vulnerability assessment piece is really, really important in this space as well, to ensure that, as well as a roof over their head and as well as the supports, that we would be looking at those vulnerability assessments to see what other supports can be put in place. The domestic and gender-based violence, when we look at our refuge spaces, the Istanbul Convention would say that it needs to be one place per 10,000 population. So if we look at the current estimate of just over 5.5 million of us, that would equate to about 554 places. We are falling short of that. And Programme for Government actually refers to an epidemic of domestic abuse. So again, like any epidemic, adequate resources will be required to combat it. So adequate refuge spaces are going to require 198 million. And all of the wraparound supports as well, service provision, training and legal support, we would ask that they would be adequately funded as well. Our ODA, I suppose our pathway to that UN target is going to require 205 million in 2027. And again, really, really important, the safeguarding for our older people, that would be funded at a extra cost of 1.4 million. And I believe I'm handing over to Michelle then to talk us through the next couple of sections. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. So I'm going to talk us through, I suppose, our proposals in terms of delivering adequate public services. So we'll start with healthcare on page 11. So I suppose our first ask here is to ensure that the capital allocation for staunch care is delivered, focusing particularly on enhanced community care. So supporting people to age well in their communities. We're also looking for a further current investment in community care of enhanced community care of 50 million. And then looking at, I suppose, enhancing universal access to GPs, particularly in rural areas, and enhancing community health networks with a view to our growing and aging population. And finally, a 75 million euro investment in home support services to deliver the additional hours of care needed to meet the health and social care needs of a growing and aging population. Now, in terms of disability, we've long advocated for a cost of disability payment, and we welcome the commitment in the Programme for Government. And I suppose for us to deliver on this precedent, we'd be looking for a weekly payment in Budget 2027, set at an initial rate of €20 a week at a cost of 242 million. Overall, we think the precedent of a weekly payment is really, really important to allow persons with a disability to manage and budget for the additional costs they face on a daily basis. And that can obviously be increased then over time. Additional investment in respite and personal assistance services Then looking to our growing and aging population, an additional 20 million euros to support people to live valued lives independently in their own communities for as long as possible. Moving on then to carers, of which there are 299,000 in the country, according to the latest census, providing 24/7 care, with very little reward or acknowledgement from the state. We're looking for an increase in the domiciliary care allowance to 400 euros, the cost of 15 million, an increase in the carer support grant at a cost of 25 million, an increase of 150 euros there. And then a pilot. This is in line with the carers guarantee in the programme for government to pilot universal basic income and services scheme for care. So the cost of 5 million to really look at what is the base level of income and services that carers need now and into the future as our population grows and ages. Moving on then to children and families here, and we welcome the moves in Budget 2026 in terms of the increase in qualified child payments to begin to address child poverty. We're proposing an increase in child benefit by 20 euros a month, and also an increase in the child support payment by children under 12 for children under 12 by 10 euros and children over 12 by 18 euros, to continue the work that was commenced in the last budget at addressing supporting those vulnerable households. In addition, we're looking for increased funding for TUSLA, for child protection and social provision for children. We all know how important this is, and we're looking for a 25 million euro investment there. Finally, as Suzanne mentioned, we're looking for broader financial literacy support, but also financial literacy to be brought in for school-age children, to help them to be able to navigate the financial landscape that they will enter, and also to understand financial literacy and financial management, which is going to be really, really crucial for them going forward. Then moving on to education, and I suppose looking at childcare, we're looking for an additional investment in capitation grants, in addition 10% capitation grants for ECCE providers in the budget, cost of 26 million. And then an additional enhancement in the rate for children as well at the cost of 9 million. Moving on then to primary and post-primary education, a continuation of the programme for government commitment to reduce the pupil-teacher ratio, so reduce it by 1 point in this budget, and also increase the capitation grant for schools at primary and post-primary by 5%. That comes in at a total cost of 2 million, increasing school places for children with special needs, so an additional 200 places in special schools at a cost of 36 million, and then an increase in the number of places in mainstream schools as well, a commensurate increase at a cost of 26 million. It's vital to continue this work on an annual basis to meet the needs of those children as they travel through the education system from early childhood to primary to post-primary onto further education. We're also looking for an expansion of support for DESH schools. So in terms of supporting DESH Plus, an additional 10 million euros, and the expansion of the JCSP library project to all DESH schools at a cost of 5 million euros. Moving on then to higher education, looking for an increase in investment, particularly for training skills and apprenticeships to address current labour market shortfalls, but also to anticipate future skills needs, particularly green skills. We're looking for 20 million there. 50 million to, I suppose, bridge the gap in higher education in terms of the funding gap identified by the Department of Public Expenditure, and where funding is currently at a cost of 50 million euro, an increase in the maintenance grant for full-time students at third level of 1,000 euros at a cost of 48 million euro. And then investment in a transition skills fund. So this is going to be really important, looking at community capacity, looking at skills development, particularly for workers who are already in the labour force, but whose role will change as a result of climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and changes to come, and how we ensure that we have, I suppose, a labour force that are ready and able to deliver the skills that we're going to need as we transition to a carbon neutral economy and society. Moving on then to rural Ireland and the regions, and looking at how we might support rural Ireland during, I suppose, our digital and our green transition. First, we're looking for a 50 million fund in terms of rural development and transition. So things like supporting smart villages, delivery of the rural proofing key performance indicators. We really welcome the development of the rural proofing policy by the department. Now it's key to deliver on that, and that should be embedded in this rural development and transition fund, and tracking that we're delivering on those indicators. Expanding key public services for rural areas, looking at local cooperatives, farm to fork initiatives to ensure that we have less reliance on imported food, and we ensure that we have fair prices for local producers selling to, I suppose, consumers in their local areas. We're also looking for a fund to future-proof rural economies. So this would it'd be further just transition funding, looking at prioritising the green economy and what green economy opportunities will occur in different regions. Every region is different. They have different strengths and weaknesses. So ensuring that the right areas are prioritised to support the electrification of the heating and transport systems in every region, and to support the SME and the community and voluntary sector to decarbonise in a way that is fair, that is resilient, and that they gain the benefits of the carbonisation and they're not left with some of the costs. And finally, then, a substantial investment in rural transport and in active travel in line with government commitments and priorities. And finally, then moving on to the whole area of just transition, I suppose the recent heat wave across Europe shows us the extreme impact of climate, and not just in terms of just heat, but also the impact that has on labour force and workforce, and whether people can work or not work in heat, the pressure it puts on health systems, on transport systems, on electricity systems, not just in terms of delivering heat, but now the pressure on systems to deliver air conditioning in the summer, and the knock-on impact that has on the entire economy and society, and also the knock-on impact that has in Ireland when there is pressure on electricity supply and generation across Europe and our closest neighbour, making it harder for us to import the electricity that we need. So to this end, we're proposing that the 500 million for the Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund be invested in our energy system, not only to upgrade the grid, but to increase our renewable energy generation capacity, to increase storage capacity, to increase interconnector capacity, to ensure that we are ready for any future situations that arise, such as that in more recent weeks. We're looking at the implementation of an aviation tax to yield 215 million euros, while government takes the opportunity during the presidency of the European Council to lead on a Europe-wide aviation tax, because it is one of the most carbon-emitting sectors, but yet is not making any contribution, unlike other sectors, to meeting our climate targets. We're also looking for investments then in how we roll out electric vehicles. At the moment, we have, I suppose, a universal grant system. We're looking for a reform of that system of grants so that it's targeted where those vehicles should be going, to those houses and households that do not have the opportunity to move to public transport, so that the grants are targeted at low-income rural households and middle-income rural households, that the home charging grant is restored to what it was. That comes at a cost of 48 million euros. And then looking at further investment in biodiversity, nature restoration, the circular economy, a solar and battery pilot scheme, a farm sustainability passport scheme, and also rural retrofitting to tackle, I suppose, the economy of scale challenges faced when retrofitting one-off rural housing. So now I'm going to pass back over to John just to wrap up and then introduce the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle, Suzanne and Nancy, for that. And thanks everybody for joining to hear everything that we've said. As I said, there's a whole range of policy recommendations laid out there relating to that have been costed for Budget 2027, as well as the tax measures to try to raise the revenue so that both sides of the ledger are addressed. So I think we can now take any questions that we might have. As I said at the beginning, the Q&A function is there. If you have any questions for any of the members of the team in relation to any of the proposals that were suggested, we would welcome them. I have an initial question has just come in here in relation to housing. So as housing costs continue to rise, how can Budget 2027 better support those who rent their homes? And maybe, Mansi, I might put that question to you.
Thanks, Sean. And I think, yeah, that's a very important question. Housing, especially renting, has become increasingly unaffordable. And like renters are under increasing pressures because rents continue to outpace incomes. While like I think there is a rent tax credit that is intended to help, it doesn't work for many of the renters who need it the most. So the most immediate step the government can take is to reform the rent tax credit system. At present, it is non-refundable. That means that low-income renters who face the greatest affordability pressures cannot benefit from its full value because they do not pay enough taxes. So, and even like the recent Department of Finance review kind of indicated the regressive nature of this tax credit, as it's not well targeted enough to low-income renters, and benefits are like in the review, it was found that the benefits tend to accrue more towards high-income earners. So making the system, the credit refundable, and also introducing an income ceiling of 100,000 euros would target support where it is needed the most and provide a meaningful short-term relief. However, tax measures can only go so far in the longer term. Improving affordability depends on increasing the supply of social and affordable housing, and expanding the social housing stock is important so that more people can access secure, genuinely affordable homes.
Okay, thanks so much, Mansi. Another question here as well. Fuel costs surged during the year. Has Social Justice Ireland any proposals to support people with fuel costs during the course of 2027? Maybe Suzanne, I might come to you on that one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I suppose, between increasing the fuel allowance payment, but I think extending out the payment is probably more important at this stage now, because we traditionally in Ireland, I think of the winter months as our heavy energy usage months, and the summertime was always seen as a time, if you got into arrears, summertime was seen as a time maybe to be able to catch up on those arrears. And as Michelle pointed out, our energy costs in the future may be just as high during the summertime, because we're going to have to spend as much money cooling our homes as we do heating them during the winter months. So I think that's definitely something to look at for the future, how we actually pay for our energy. But that also opens up, I suppose, a much bigger conversation about reducing the cost of energy. So looking much more at renewables. That will also link into, our commitments in the Climate Action Plan and Sustainable Development Goals, our emissions targets, retrofitting our homes so that we use less energy in order to be able to keep our homes warm during the winter and dry. I think damp is probably the big issue in this country, but also cool during the summer months as well. So and ultimately fuel allowance is a transfer from the state into, fossil fuel subsidies also. So like it's a much bigger picture. But I mean, the bottom line is, at this particular moment in time, we are at record numbers of households who are in arrears and in long-term arrears with their energy bills. And also the level of arrears are quite worrying, because it's one thing being behind by €60 on your bill, it's another thing being behind by 600 on your bill. And we are encouraged to shop around. We are encouraged to change our individual behaviours when it comes to our energy costs. However, what you saw for a lot of low-income households who have always been able to manage their energy costs, their bills just exploded. So they're nothing that they were doing changed. the prices just rocketed and all of a sudden they were in arrears. So I suppose there's a lot of moving parts there. I think there's definitely supporting individual households to manage at the moment. There is maybe as individuals we need to be slightly smarter, but ultimately if energy is an unaffordable commodity, we need to be looking at the price of energy, the source of energy, and again really looking towards long-term solar and wind power in this country. And we could see even, I will stop in a minute, but the geopolitical, I suppose, pressures as well of being reliant on fossil fuels, and sometimes how that can make you I suppose liable or vulnerable maybe to pressures in other parts of the system because of our reliance on fossil fuels and energies. But for this particular budget, it's the extension. I think the extra 4 weeks I think would make such a huge difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. We have another question here. Michelle, maybe it's best for you to respond to this one in relation to UBI. So basically, is it the reference to universal basic income for carers? And basically, can you just elaborate on that or explain that a bit further?
Yes, so there already is a universal basic income scheme now, no longer a pilot for artists, although not every artist is eligible. There's still a lottery. However, there is a commitment to a carers guarantee in the programme for government, as it was in the previous programme for government. Obviously, a carers guarantee means ensuring carers have access to sufficient income and services, to provide them with the minimum social floor. So we're proposing a pilot scheme to look at the income that would be required to give a carer a minimum social floor, cognizant of the fact that the government has committed to a full review of carers allowance and the various carers payments and how they interact with household income and various thresholds. So I think this is an opportune moment to look at what a universal basic carers allowance would look like for carers that every carer would be entitled to, and then how that would interact with the different services and other payments that are also within the system. But given that our population is growing and aging, and care is going to become, a much bigger factor in our economy and society, we need to look now at how we resource this and support those carers, those 299,000 carers who at the present are providing care, often unrecognised and unrewarded by the state, or rewarded in a very limited capacity.
Okay. We're coming up on 10:45, but there's maybe time for just one last question here, which is, there was a mention in the, let me just read this properly. You mentioned in relation to working people, refundable tax credits. Can you please explain what is meant by refundable? Maybe either Suzanne wants to take that, yeah.
I don't know. I suppose this is why I'd said maybe go read the document, because we could be here now for a particular, for a little while. But I mean, ultimately, our tax credits only really kick in once we've earned a certain amount. So if you don't earn enough, the credit's moving. Again, my brain was formed in a period of tax-free allowances, so maybe Michelle might take over as well. But ultimately, if you're on a low income and they shift tax credits in the budget, you don't actually benefit from it. It doesn't make a difference in your take home. So, again, it was interesting, even at the pre-budget forum again yesterday, I keep going back to it, but it's very fresh in my mind. We had a presentation there from an economist who had sort of looked at child benefit payment almost as being a refundable tax credit. So it is something that's in Labour economists' lingo. And it was just interesting that she had framed it in that sense. But I mean, ultimately, again, there's a bit of reading about it, but that is really it. It's like if you are on a low income, and then as those tax credits move in the budgets, you don't actually see any benefit from it. So I don't know whether Michelle or Mansi wants to pick up on any more clarification than that, but I would encourage people to sit and read down through it. It is a little bit technical, but that's the nub of it.
Yeah, and the full details on that are laid out in our socioeconomic review. So when you're finished reading through our budget choices document, carry on then on our website again to the publication section, and you'll see our SER, our socioeconomic review, social justice matters. and that also has a full section on refundable tax credits as well. Okay, look, we're at 10:45. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and hearing what our budget proposals are for this year. We hope to continue to engage with government and with the budgetary process over the next number of months until October to try to really advocate for the proposals that we're recommending, both in terms of spending and taxation as we laid out. I want to thank Mansi, Michelle and Suzanne for laying out our proposals today, and indeed for all of the work in putting together this document and working in this project over the last number of months. And we will indeed continue right through until October and beyond in terms of our response to budget. So again, this year, as in every other year, we will have a response to the budget the day after in Boswell's Hotel. At present, that's looking like the Wednesday after the first Tuesday on October. Obviously, if budget day moves, we'll also move too. But that's where we are at present. So listen, thanks everybody for joining in this morning and have a good day.